ਦ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਦਾ ਹਾਰਦਿਕ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ, ਸਰੀ, ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਤੋਂ। ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਵਾਂਗਾ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ। 1984 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਅਤੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਕਮੈਮੋਰੇਟਿਵ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਾਣੀਆਂ, ਕਵਿਤਾਵਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਲਾਈਫ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸਿਸ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕੁਝ ਅਹਿਮ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ। ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜਿਆ ਹੈ। ਅਤੇ ਆਓ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਤੇ ਵਿਸਥਾਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਕੀ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਪਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਖਲੋਤੇ ਹਾਂ। ਆਓ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ।
ਆਵੋ ਜੀ, ਆਵੋ ਜੀ, ਆਵੋ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ।
Today we are gathered on the Majha House online platform to mark a rather somber day, a day that represents what one would regard as one of the most terrible, shameful chapters in our nation's history. A day and time that belied all the hopes we pinned on our own great constitution and on the custodians of its laws and its values. I'm not really going to go back into the chapter and into what happened because I think it's alive and we know it all. We know the numbers that we lost. We know the people that left cities fleeing back to Punjab. We know the many that were rendered homeless and had to stay in camps for long periods. And we also know that it destroyed an entire community and it gave us a sort of a feeling of being a minority, of being outsiders and of unbelonging suddenly. For me also, there were a great many changes and it brought home to me many things that I don't think I had really paid attention to that much. Questions of identity, of nation, of who belongs, of why do you suddenly not belong, and which is your homeland. It is because of that I regard 1984 and what happened in the 3 days. I had lived for many years in Madhya Pradesh, having grown up there, studied there, and then schooling in Mussoorie and then back in Delhi. But this was the moment for me that seemed that I had become part of a minority community. It was also a time that tore communities apart in somewhat the same way that partition had done. And you often heard this kind of aligning of partition and what happened there and the violence and brutality that we had witnessed during 1984. A very visible, very successful, even dominant community that was, always seen and always heard, suddenly became minorities and they were transformed. Farmers, landlords, businessmen, army people, policemen, of whom my father was one as well. It seemed overnight that this concerted violence and brutality turned you into, what we were always told, that you're just 2% and you became a minority. As I said, I'd lived in Delhi for years. I had studied here and looked upon with suspicion because I remember we had just returned from Nagpur back to Delhi on a posting, and we were trying to find a house here and made appointments to meet landlords. It just seemed to me that things became very difficult as soon as they came to know that we were sick. We did not even look the part, but of course, you have a surname. And it just seemed like people turned you away just because there was suspicion and there was this, you were suddenly being held to account as part of a community, as part of this. These people who had suddenly done something so terrible and who had to be looked at with fear and suspicion. I also remember was the time that we were trying to put our daughter older daughter Gayatri into school here in Delhi, and we couldn't find a place for her. And of course, it is not because of the minority reason. It was mainly because it was mid session, and it was difficult to find a place. But what was strange was that for the first time we thought that, oh, we must look at an institution, a school. We must look at Guru Harkishan school. They would not turn us away. What made me change, what made me completely this thought even enter my head at that point, that this is what, this is my people, this is where I need to be, this is where I belong. So many people in those days, so many friends who we would meet would tell you about daily taunts about young men who were blowing smoke into their faces, of having to explain themselves and their beliefs and their faith. And it almost felt like you'd been abandoned by the state, because the killings were being described as something that was natural and something that was inevitable. The guilty were still free, and so many of them continue to be so, with just a couple of convictions. Our younger daughter Bani grew up listening to many of these stories around the dining table. And when my younger daughter Bani was at JNU, like I said, she was doing history, and she decided to do her dissertation on 44. And she wanted to meet these people. She wanted to listen to the stories. She wanted to go and meet the survivors. And she went to many of these resettlement colonies, the widows' colonies, etc. And as this continued, she became silent and withdrawn. And I remember very well one afternoon, I opened her door and I found her sitting on the bed with listening to the conversations that she had taped and transcribing them, and just crying. There were just tears rolling down her cheeks. And I think it was just helpless anger. She was dealing with the hurt and the trauma of her people. And in that instant, it seemed to me that she too had taken on the garb of victimhood, the garb of a minority. What are we passing on to our children? There are so many things that we have not talked about, that we have not discussed, that we have not even faced probably. And when we decided, and I'm glad Ishmeet came up with this idea of doing on the 1st of November, because I think it is important for us to remember, it is important for us to keep this history alive, because like I said, for me, it marked that moment of change, that moment of trauma, the moment I became a minority. And I think that may be the story of many people. We need to remember. We cannot afford to forget that. I'd like to hand you over to Ishmeet now, who has curated this session. Ishmeet is a writer. She's a translator and she's an academic based in Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Her anthology of writings on 84, titled Black November, contains the voices of survivors, writers, poets, activists, and she's gone a long way to record the violence and the events of 1984. Ishmeet, over to you now.
Thanks, Preeti. And I need to really thank everybody who's come together today, both as speakers and listeners. And I think it's very, very important for all of us to speak and all of us to also listen. And like Preeti has a story, I'm sure many of us, in fact, every one of us have a story. And what I'll be doing is I'll talk about my own experience and how 84 unfolded to me. And then I'm going to read a small poem, because I've been wondering, are we really going forward, or are we stuck in the moment of Chaurasi? So I was 6 years old, when 84 actually happened, and I have really hazy memories of the incident. Being brought up outside Punjab, outside Delhi, I was in one of the most secure small town, Simla, and there was a Gurdwara right in front of our house. And nothing happened on 31st to 2nd. It was, I think, 3rd or 4th when a mob came in and they started stoning the Gurdwara. And what I remember is watching from a small little window and making some noises. And our next door neighbor had asked us to switch off all the lights. So we had switched off all the lights, and I was making a bit of noises. And so my brother had, held me very tight, and he had actually, put a hand on my mouth, and I was feeling suffocated. So he was not allowing me to speak. And I had a brother who was in teenage, 14, 15 years. And our next door neighbor walked into us. And that's something very important for me, because this is what I saw. And this was my experience of 84. So he was a journalist. His name was Ravinder Randev. He just walked into our house, and I remember he was not even wearing slippers. And he said, my father was called Chaudhry Sahab, and he said, Chaudhry Sahab, just stay inside, don't come out, and nothing's going to happen to you. I assure you of this. And and he left our home. He went out and he started calling abuses to all these people who were in the mob. Being a small town, everybody knew each other, and he had identified who those people were. Since he was a journalist, people got a bit scared, and they left their activity in between and ran away from there. So no one came to our house. And then I have a vague memory of running to the Gurdwara and seeing, the Paiji. He was bleeding, he had been beaten, but then they couldn't do anything to the Gurdwara. We've been brought up like Ravinder Randev's daughter was my friend. Today she's a very, very successful doctor. And both of us every evening used to go to the temple. And then from the temple, we used to come to the Gurdwara. And the only interest we had was that the priest would talk to us, and he would give us, chota prasad, and the white thing that they give us, the white meetha prasad. And in the Gurdwara, we would get halwa. So this was our mere interest of going to, these temples. And we just did not have any idea of what religion was or what God was. And in school, both of us were in Loreto. So in school, we would actually go and pray in the chapel. So our praying actually happened in the chapel because it was quiet. So I don't know what religion we belonged to. And so when I came to Gujarat, and it's at an age of 34 that, the identity as a Sikh or identity, I don't know even whether I relate to Sikhism even today. I really don't know. I do derive my strength, but I'm not sure because I believe in almost everything. So when I came here, there was a student who had married, who was a Muslim girl and had married a Hindu boy. And she talked to me about her affair. And then she told me how, during the Godhra violence, this boyfriend of hers had worn a cap and come to see her if she was fine or not. And he came to visit her in a house where there were 55 people housing together. So this Hindu boy comes in and sees whether, she's safe or not, and then goes away. And I was like, wow, look at the kind of risk, this boy took. And then later on, they did get married and they have a son, and there is a different story about that. And so this was my query where I thought, let me write about some kind of stories. Let me bring literature around these incidences. And this is when I spoke to my father. And my father happened to say, nobody wrote our stories. Where is literature of 84 for us? And that was the moment for me. And I tried collecting a lot of other stories too, but people wouldn't talk to me. People wouldn't confide in me. And I was immediately the outsider. And so I went back to so-called my people, and I started collecting their stories. And that's when I also feel a dearth, because I felt not much justice was done to 84. Not many people were writing. And then another question was, what are we to write? Are we going to keep playing the victim card, or what are we going to write? Yes, I mean, nobody can deny, we've been victimized, but where are we going to take this? And then a very important question was coming to me. Like, I asked my father, when my father talked to me about so many other things which I never knew. He talked to me about how his friends had behaved with him in his office, how he had to walk on the railway track to reach home to save himself, how for about 4 days he did not go to office, and maybe almost a week or so. And when I asked him, where was this narrative all the while? I mean, you've never talked to us about this. So my father said one thing. He said, you had a beautiful narrative that friends come and save you. Your neighbors come and save you. I did not, that was your experience. You had to learn from your experience. I did not have to contaminate your innocent mind with stories of how people can also hate you. And at 34, I get to know other stories, but that was an age when I could handle those stories. So I decided, and I talked to a lot of friends, and Rachel Bari is with us here. She's been one of the moving strengths for me to do this anthology. And I talked to her, and I talked to so many other friends, and I was talking to them, telling them that we are going to write stories of strength. Let's all get together and write stories of strength. And we extended the narrative, from victimizing a community, to how it affects people. We moved from community victimization to human rights issues. And that's what we brought in common people. We brought in stories about girls. We brought in stories about, friends saving each other, and how in a situation of violence, there is a threat not just to one community, but to all communities, because we are inclusive society. We may seem to be divided, but we all live together. And people like us who are in Indian diaspora, who have no sense of Punjab, or who have no sense of their own religions, I think we can never live with single identities. We live with multiple identities. And so how do we look at these issues? And 84 doesn't seem to have stopped anywhere. It's not just about closure. It's about that it is continuing in various ways even today. And one another dilemma which I often face is that I do come up as an insider's face, because I also have my own story to share. And the dilemma that I face times and again is that you as a Sikh is identified as somebody extremely benevolent, extremely kind, people coming and serving langar at various times, helping people, helping others around. And in times of violence, the entire narrative changes. You become a militant, you become a Khalistani, you become somebody who is terrorizing the nation, right? You are the greatest terror to the nation. You become a Khadku. So where do we stand? And what I feel is that narrative is not ending anywhere, So where is the Khalistan today? Like, why are we talking about it in this sense? Why are we how come it has become, an abuse to all of us, right? And that's what kind of troubles me. I know I have limited time, so I'm going to, read out my poem and my thoughts, with the poem here. This poem's called A Chapter of Indian History. We are the living dead, skeletons of our past. Our bodies remind each one of you that we are a chapter of Indian history. Born in this country, we owned it, protected it, were proud of it, loved it, and even nurtured it. Our field yielded gold. We were the soldiers and are the farmers. Till on the fateful day, a mother was killed. Instead, they killed her own children. Maybe we were the foster children, but innocent, we did not kill our mother. They called us militants, terrorists, and anti-national. They called us many names, and we became a stock of jokes for them. Then years passed. We lost our children to drugs, depression, and fatigue. A struggle for survival. They did charity on us. We needed involvement. They took mercy on us. We needed empowerment. They said they will be brothers to us. We said we needed justice. They said they will help us forget the dark chapter. We said we needed an apology. The fatal history is adding onto the dark chapters and prolonged years of injustice and indifference. With this, I now, so I'll
Yeah, I'm
invite
here.
Sunil. Yeah. So Sunil is a journalist, he's author, he's a social commentator, filmmaker, and a television producer. He's based in Delhi. His widely acclaimed Dastan Goi, like kind of very well appreciated, and it was performed across India. So over to you, Sunil. Yeah, thank you.
1984 is traumatic because for many people, for many reasons, some very obvious, but some things resonate with you and stay with you, like a hurt that refuses to go away, like a wound that refuses to heal. And my
Yes.
moment of reckoning in '84 came when the Sikh dry cleaner that I had in Nizamabad West, where I was staying at that point, uh, I found him lying, bleeding, broken, uh, left for dead in a ditch in Nizamabad West. And I remember my friends and I scooped him up, took him to Mulchan, literally for repairs and for stitching and for surgery, which he needed very badly. His limbs were broken. He was not in a good way, and it was not a very happy space to be in. And to date, it's been what, 40 odd years? I can't look that man in the face. He was a youngster. That was in '84. Cut to when India was celebrating 50 years of independence. I was writing as I was working as an assistant editor with Outlook, and I was doing a cover story on the Indian partition and partition memories. And this really broke my heart because I found myself with a Sikh family in, was it Patel Nagar or was it Rajendra Nagar? Yeah. And this lady, her entire family, her father, her mother, her cousins, her sister, her brothers, her uncles, her aunts, was slaughtered in front of her. And the father ritually slaughtered all the daughters. He decapitated them with a sword. This girl ducked. So the father's sword hit her on the head here. So to date, she has a scar which runs across the center of her head. And this girl lay in a heap of dead bodies and she passed out. When she came around, and she was a girl of about 7, when she came around, of course, the hysteria was over, the mob had dispersed, her family was dead, and she was lying in a bleeding heap of corpses, left for dead. I went to meet her, and it broke my heart because this woman broke down and told me, she says, that was 1947, and we found ourselves a different country. And we said, okay, not Pakistan, we'll go to India. And then they came in '84 and burnt this house down as well. And they burnt this house down. They left my son for dead. Where do we go now? At the cusp of history where we are today, we really need to do some soul searching and think about this. Where do we go on from here? Who have we become? What happened in a war is amplified about 10 million times by now, where hatred is a state-driven policy. And I'm sticking my neck out to say this because I really don't give a damn. I'm beyond caring. I've done my innings, but this hatred must stop. And this is as good a time as any other to think, to introspect, to sit back and soul search. That's what I'm coming for. Well, I'm done. I'm done. That's really something I've been needed to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sunil, about this. Yeah, and I think it's very important to do the soul searching. It's actually very touching. Yes.
Because she said, "Hun kithe jaiye?" Until we don't find the answers to those questions, we have lost people as a nation. I don't think we have a future. And is this the legacy, the generation, that we want to leave behind for our children? God forbid. God.
And I don't know for how long would we keep searching places for our own selves, you know? I mean, is there actually a place, you know? So I mean, and how will we actually build spaces and places? What are we going to leave for our generations? I think these are very important questions which, you know, Sunil has raised. And so thank you, Sunil. I think we'll move forward. I'm going to invite Professor Sarbjot Singh Bell. Sarbjot is Dean Academic Affairs at Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. And he's an architect by training. He teaches at the School of Architect and Planning and writes powerful and extremely beautiful poetry. Sarbjot, please.
Thank you, Shmeet. In fact, what I would just carry forward from where Sunil left, I think 1984 pogrom in Delhi is not to be seen in isolation. It is one of the links in the chain, and we have to address it historically. And we have to connect the dots. As he mentioned that, you know, a family who came from Pakistan, from the other side of the border in 1947 to find a home here, and you know, spent another 37 years to build that home again, finally to find themselves again devastated on the roads and at the same point where they were in 1947. And there are many other dots, you know, which need to be connected, because why am I saying that? What the poem that I'm going to read, you know, because being in Punjab, whatever happened in Delhi or outside Punjab during pogrom, it was an outsider's view for us, people who were in Punjab. In the same manner that people who were outside, whatever happened before that pogrom in Punjab, what was happening, they had an outside view of that. So finally, this pogrom or Operation Blue Star, you know, which preceded it, was the one which, you know, brought this collective consciousness to see this whole thing in a perspective, where, you know, Punjab, which was in isolation, facing the brunt of terrorism and, you know, counter-terrorism and whatever was happening, encounters, suddenly, you know, this brought the whole the one community on the same page to see it in complete comprehensive manner. So my poem is about connecting those dots in the history, and I didn't want to, you know, write a poem having an outside view as a poet and addressing this issue. So I, in fact, recently read a novel by one of my friends, Jasbir Sachdeva, Bobby Sachdeva, and that gave me a kind of insight into what had happened there, because it is kind of a biography which he has written, and he was in Delhi. And then when this program happened, I spoke to a few friends who I knew had gone through similar experiences, and I tried to encapsulate, you know, that inside view when I heard them. And it was, I think, incumbent for people like us who were outside that zone to be able to experience it. So the poem that I'm going to read is, again, as usual, a very longish poem, because it brings, I don't want to, you know, curtail on the experience or the dots that connect the history. I don't want to leave anything. So without much ado, then I would go on to this. This poem is titled, it is in Punjabi, और इदा जड़ा सिरलेख है वो है कि ए मेरी आत्म कथा है। ए मेरी आत्म कथा है, लहू दे रंग लफ्जां विच लिबड़ी, हंजुआं संग हरफां हो लिबड़ी, ए मेरी मातम कथा है, ए मेरी आत्म कथा है। जद भी किसे रक्त बीज दा रत धरत ते डुलदा है, जद भी मथियों नफरत दा कोई तीजा नेत्र खुलदा है, फिर तांडव दी तरथली विच बेदोशां दी बली देण दी प्रथा है। ए मेरी अजल तो लिखी लिखाई आदम खोर दी आदम कथा है, ए मेरी मातम कथा है। हां मैं ही हां इस कथा दा मुख करदार, बदस्तूर बादस्तार सिख भाई जी खालसा सिंह साहब सरदार। जो भी कह के सद लो मैनू ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਲਵੋ ਪੁਕਾਰ, ਹਾਲੇ ਕੱਚੀ ਉਮਰ ਹੈ ਮੇਰੀ, ਮਸੀਂ 10 ਤੋਂ ਉੱਤੇ 4, 14 years old। ਨਾਲ ਹੈ ਮੇਰੇ ਸ਼ਾਮਿਲ ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਨਿੱਕਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ, ਮਾਂ ਪਿਤਾ ਮੇਰੀ ਭੈਣ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਕੁਨਬੇ ਦੇ ਜੀ 4। ਮੇਰਾ ਪਿਤਾ ਕਬੀਲਦਾਰ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਦਾ, ਹਿੰਮਤੀ ਕਿਰਤੀ ਮਿਹਨਤੀ ਸਿਰੜੀ ਤੇ ਖੁੱਦਾਰ। ਉਜੜ ਕੇ ਸੰਨ 47 ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀ ਆਇਆ ਸਰਹੱਦੋਂ ਪਾਰ, ਲੁੱਟਿਆ ਪੁੱਟਿਆ ਬੇਘਰਾ ਯਤੀਮ ਤੇ ਖੱਜਲ ਖੁਆਰ, ਆ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਦਿਲ ਵਸਿਆ ਕਰ ਹੱਟੀ ਸਦਰ ਬਾਜ਼ਾਰ। 10 ਨਹੁੰਆਂ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਤ ਨਾਲ ਖੜਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਖਰਾ ਵਪਾਰ, ਆਖੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਮਹਿਬੂਬਾ ਮੇਰੀ ਮੈਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦਾ ਦਿਲਦਾਰ। ਮਾਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਇਸ ਕੁਨਬੇ ਦੀ ਅਨਪੂਰਣਾ ਪਾਲਨਹਾਰ, ਉਸ ਦੀ ਝੋਲੀ ਚੋਂ ਡੁੱਲ ਡੁੱਲ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਮਮਤਾ ਪਿਆਰ ਦੁਲਾਰ। ਸਰੂ ਜਹੀ ਸੀ ਕਦ ਕਾਠੀ ਉਸਦੀ, ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਪੋਠੋ ਹਾਰ, ਬਿਲ ਨਾਗਾ ਮੱਥਾ ਟੇਕਦੀ, ਕੋਈ ਦਿਨ ਹੋਵੇ ਕੋਈ ਵਾਰ, ਭਲਾ ਸਰਬਤ ਦਾ ਮੰਗਦੀ ਸੀਸ ਗੰਜ ਦੇ ਗੁਰੂਦੁਆਰ। ਭੈਣ ਸੀ ਮੇਰੀ 16 ਦੀ, ਝੱਲੀ ਨਾ ਜਾਏ ਨੁਹਾਰ, ਮਾਂ ਵਰਗੀ ਸੀ ਕਦ ਕਾਠੀ ਉਸਦੀ, ਲੰਮਸਲਮੀ ਮੁਟਿਆਰ। ਇਹ ਸੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਨਿੱਕਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਇੱਕ ਸੰਪੂਰਨ ਸੁਪਨ ਸੰਸਾਰ। ਫਿਰ ਆਇਆ ਚੋਰ 84, ਲੈ ਬੁੱਕਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਟਾਰ, ਸੰਨ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਢਾ ਗਿਆ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਰਬਾਰ। ਉਸ ਕਾਲੇ ਕਾਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਆਖਤਾ ਆਪਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਬਲੂ ਸਟਾਰ, ਉਸ ਕਾਲੀ ਬੋਲੀ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਜਦ ਤਾਰਾ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ ਨੀਲਾ। ਪਿਤਾ ਦਾ ਮੁਖ ਸੀ ਲਾਹਾ ਲੋਖਾ, ਪਿਤਾ ਦਾ ਮੁਖ ਸੀ ਲੋਹਾ ਲਾਖਾ, ਮਾਂ ਦਾ ਰੰਗ ਸੀ ਪੀਲਾ, ਇੱਕ ਨਾਗਣ ਦੇ ਡੰਗ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਜਗ ਜ਼ਹਿਰੀਲਾ। ਇੱਕ ਝੱਖੜ ਝੁਲਿਆ ਕਰ ਗਿਆ ਹਰਮੰਦਰ ਤੀਲਾ ਤੀਲਾ। ਫੇਰ ਚੁਮਾਸਾ ਲੰਘ ਗਿਆ ਪਰ ਅੱਗ ਨਾ ਹੋਈ ਠੰਡੀ, ਲੂਈਆਂ ਆਂਦਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਾਗ ਪਈ ਫਿਰ ਚੰਡੀ। ਫਿਰ ਖੰਡਿਤ ਹਰਮੰਦਰ ਦੇ ਰੋਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੰਡਾ ਕੋਈ ਲਹਿਰਾ ਗਿਆ, ਤੇ ਸਾਲ 84 ਦੇ ਅੱਸੂ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਾਣਾ ਇੱਕ ਵਰਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਫਿਰ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਗਲੀਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਚ ਗਿਆ ਹਾਹਾਕਾਰ, ਇੱਕ ਹੱਲੇ ਪੂਰੀ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗੱਦਾਰ। ਇਹ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਵੱਡਾ ਰੁੱਖ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਹਿੰਦ ਦੀ ਧਰਤ ਹਿਲਾ ਗਿਆ, ਇਹ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਵੱਡਾ ਰੁੱਖ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਹਿੰਦ ਦੀ ਧਰਤ ਹਿਲਾ ਗਿਆ। ਕਿ ਉਹ ਹਿੰਦ ਦੀ ਚਾਦਰ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਬੋੜ ਭੁਲਾ ਗਿਆ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਸ ਧਰਮ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਆਪਣਾ ਸੀਸ ਲੁਹਾ ਗਿਆ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਅਨੁਗਾਮੀ ਆ ਗਏ ਸੜਕਾਂ ਤੇ ਲੈ ਹੱਥੀਂ ਅੱਗ ਹਥਿਆਰ, ਤੇ ਆਖ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਵੱਢ ਦਿਓ ਬਚੇ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਸਰਦਾਰ। ਉਸ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਚੌਂਕਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਚੁਣ ਚੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਮਾਰ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਤਿਲਕ ਜੰਜੂ ਲਈ ਸਿਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਵਾਰ। ਹਿੰਦ ਦੀ ਚਾਦਰ ਚੀਰ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਰਤੀ ਚਿਥੜੇ ਚਿਥੜੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਮਾਰ ਮਕਾਉਣੇ ਸਿਖੜੇ। ਹਟਿਓਂ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਰਾਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕੋ ਥਾਂ ਰੁਕ ਗਿਆ, ਵੇਖ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਵਹਿਸ਼ੀ ਭੀੜ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਸੀ ਸੁੱਕ ਗਿਆ। ਮੈਂ ਚਾਂਦਨੀ ਚੌਂਕ ਚੋਂ ਭੱਜਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਸੀਸਗੰਜ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੁਕ ਗਿਆ। ਇਕੱਠੀ ਹੋਈ ਭੀੜ ਬਾਹਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੰਗ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਸੀਸ, ਅੰਦਰ 9ਵੇਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੀਸ਼ੇ ਪੈ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਚੀਸ। ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਲਹੂ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਉਹ ਵਹਿਸ਼ੀ ਪਾਗਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਹਰ ਬਸ਼ਰ ਦਰਿੰਦਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਤੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਸੀ ਜੰਗਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਸੱਜਣ ਹੋਏ ਫਿਰ ਠੱਗ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਭਗਤ ਸੀ ਕੋਡੇ ਰਾਖਸ਼। ਸੱਜਣ ਹੋਏ ਫਿਰ ਠੱਗ ਸੀ, ਤੇ ਭਗਤ ਸੀ ਕੋਡੇ ਰਾਖਸ਼। ਖੂਨ ਦੀ ਹੋਲੀ ਖੇਡ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਜਗਦੀਸ਼ ਬਣ ਹਰਨਾਕਸ਼। ਖੂਨ ਦੀ ਹੋਲੀ ਖੇਡ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਜਗਦੀਸ਼ ਬਣ ਹਰਨਾਕਸ਼। ਕੋਈ ਨਰਸਿੰਘ ਨਾ ਪ੍ਰਗਟਿਆ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਅਵਤਾਰ, ਤਰਕਾਲਾਂ ਰਾਤਾਂ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਨਰਸੰਹਾਰ। ਮੈਂ ਮੂੰਹ ਹਨੇਰੇ ਨਿਕਲਿਆ ਘਟ ਪਹਿਰ ਰਾਤ ਦੇ 4। ਮੈਕਸਵੈਲ ਪਰੇਰਾ ਅਫਸਰ ਨੇ ਜਦ ਕੱਢਿਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰ। ਮੈਂ ਡਿੱਗਦਾ ਢਹਿੰਦਾ ਤੁਰ ਪਿਆ, ਵੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਘਰ ਪਾਰ। ਮੈਂ ਡਿੱਗਦਾ ਢਹਿੰਦਾ ਤੁਰ ਪਿਆ ਵੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਘਰ ਬਾਰ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਸੁੱਕੀ ਅੱਖ ਨਾਲ ਵੇਖਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਮੰਜ਼ਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਇੱਕ ਅੰਨਾ ਬੋਲਾ ਖੋਲਾ ਖੜਾ ਸੀ, ਘਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਫਰਸ਼ ਤੇ ਪਿਤਾ ਦੀ ਪੱਗ ਸੀ, ਸਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਿਰ ਦੇ ਚੀਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀ ਚਿੱਟੀ ਇੱਕ ਲਕੀਰ। ਅੱਥਰ ਸੀ ਪਥਰਾ ਗਏ, ਨੈਣੀ ਬਾਝੋਂ ਨੀਰ ਸੀ। ਭੈਣ ਗੱਲ ਸੰਧੂਰੀ ਚੁੰਨੀ, ਪਾਟੀ ਲੀਰੋ ਲੀਰ। ਉਹਦੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਤੇ ਨੱਖ ਨਹੁੰਦਰਾਂ ਤੇ ਕੰਡ ਸੀ ਕਿੱਕਰ ਕਰੀਰ। ਮੈਥੋਂ ਸਹੀ ਨਾ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਇਹ ਪਹਾੜ ਦੇ ਜਿੱਡੀ ਪੀੜ, ਮੇਰੀ ਛਾਤੀ ਛਲਨੀ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ, ਮੇਰਾ ਸੀਨਾ ਦੇਵੋ ਚੀਰ। 47 ਤੋਂ 37 ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਏ ਸਾਂ ਮੁੜ ਆਬਾਦ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸੰਨ 84 ਕਰ ਗਿਆ, ਮੁੱਢੋਂ ਸੁੱਢੋਂ ਬਰਬਾਦ। ਆਪਣੇ ਹੀ ਹਮਵਤਨਾਂ ਹੱਥੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਹੋਈ ਤਕਸੀਮ, ਮਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਾਂਗਰ ਵਿਧਵਾ, ਮੈਂ ਪਿਤਾ ਦੇ ਵਾਂਗ ਯਤੀਮ। ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਰਿਫਿਊਜੀ ਕੈਂਪਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁੜ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਏ ਮੁਖੀ। ਅੱਜ ਫੇਰ ਹੈ ਸੰਨ 84 ਉੱਤੇ ਪੌਂਖਾ 37 ਸਾਲਾਂ। ਅੱਜ ਫਿਰ 37 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ 84 ਸੰਨ ਵਿਸਾਖੀ ਨੂੰ। ਅੱਜ ਫੇਰ ਹੈ ਸੰਨ 84 ਉੱਤੇ ਪੌਂਖਾ 37 ਸਾਲਾ। ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਭੈਣ ਮਾਰਦੀ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਅੰਦਰੋਂ ਤਾਲਾ। ਦੇਖ ਦੀਵਾਲੀ ਦੇ ਦੀਵੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਰੰਗ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਏ ਕਾਲਾ। ਉਦੋਂ ਦੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਮਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਏ ਸੁੰਨ ਮਸੁੰਨ। ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਜੁੜੀਆਂ ਉਂਗਲਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਸਲਾਈਓਂ ਸੁਪਨੇ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਬੁਣ। 37 ਸਾਲ ਨੇ ਲੰਘ ਗਏ, ਉਹਦੀ ਖਤਮ ਨਾ ਹੋਈ ਉੱਨ। ਹਲੇ ਵੀ ਸੁੱਕਣੇ ਪਾ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਲਾ ਪਿਤਾ ਦੀ ਪੱਗ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਇਆ। ਤੇ ਆਥਣ ਵੇਲੇ ਆਖਦੀ ਮੈਂਡਾ ਸਿਰ ਦਾ ਸਾਈਂ ਨਾ ਆਇਆ। ਜਿਸ ਇੱਕ ਹੰਝੂ ਨਾ ਕੇਰਿਆ, ਨਾ ਨੈਣੀ ਰਿੜਕਿਆ ਲੂਣ। ਜਿਹਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਬਰਫ਼ ਸੀ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਵੇਖ ਸਾਈਂ ਦਾ ਖੂਨ। ਉਹ 21 ਜੂਨ ਹੰਢਾ ਰਹੀ 1084 ਜੂਨ। ਇਹ ਸੰਦੀਵੀ ਸੰਤਾਪ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਸਦੀਵੀ ਸੰਤਾਪ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਮੇਰੀ ਵਿਥਿਆ ਦੀ ਵਿਥਾ ਹੈ, ਸਰਪ ਦੋਸ਼ ਦਾ ਸਰਾਪ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਅਜ਼ਲੋਂ ਆਦਮ ਕਥਾ ਹੈ, ਜਿੰਦ ਪੀੜ ਪੀਂਦੀ ਚੁੱਪਚਾਪ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਮੇਰੀ ਆਤਮ ਕਥਾ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਵੈਣ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਵਿਰਲਾਪ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਮੂਕ ਮਾਤਮ ਕਥਾ।
Thank you,
Shukriya.
Sarbjit. Sarbjot. It's very less to say thank you to you. And I think many of us are with moist eyes at the moment. I felt it was a kind of a graphic narrative, as if the entire picture of history and the present today was moving, just in front of my eyes. Nothing more beautiful, lovely vocabulary, very hitting, extremely political. And I think this is what we can now call literature of Chaurasi. In a way, for a student of literature, elating. We have something, which opens up a lot of things for us to read in this poem. I think if we got to read the narrative, this poem can be one full composite piece. Thank you, Mirbani. I don't know how to thank. Yeah. Kavaljeet Deol has actually joined us, and I'll invite her now. She joined the Indian Police Service. She served in Goa, in Delhi, in Arunachal Pradesh, and many other places. She was also on deputation with the National Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. Well, I was posted in Delhi at the time in 1984, and but I was about nine months pregnant. I was to have my daughter then, And I was planning to go on leave on the 31st of October. She was due in November. And of course, we all know the events of 31st of October. As a result, all leave was stopped. And even though I was to go on maternity leave, that was also stopped. So I was not allowed to join duties though, because I was not really fit to join duties. But I was in a position to be a witness to everything that was happening. Of course, the whole events were so disturbing and were so troubling, but there had been a lot of events leading up to it which were equally troubling. So all these things were within my mind, and it was very difficult for me to, to sort of be able to express all that was happening. So I made notes for what eventually turned out to be this book, The Year of the Hawks. And I continued during my career to speak to various protagonists, including military officers who had been in Operation Blue Star, and including being a part of the interrogation of some terrorists. And as a result, I just kept on filling in all the details. But I waited to retire in order to finally finish the book and make it into a whole. And the book takes the events of Punjab from 82 onwards to 84. And it's set both in Punjab and in Delhi. So it covers the entire thing. And I mean, I was more like I wanted to make sure that these things were never forgotten. And therefore, I wanted to put it down in black and white. I will read a few excerpts from the book which relate particularly to 1984. That is the book, The Year of the Hawks. So I have marked some passages. I don't want to just read from beginning to end, so I will read bits of it. The protagonist from Punjab is a young boy called Farid, and he is moving at this moment towards Delhi. So it is the last morning of October, and the steam hangs over the fields. Soon the mustard will spread yellow as pollen over the countryside, and the grass will freeze at dawn. At dusk, the smoke suspended in the street will smell of warm winter foods. Sarson da saag, khichdi, jawn di kheer, and afterwards, bed on a full stomach will be a warm tent in paradise. So he is moving by bus to come to Delhi. After innumerable delays, the bus pulls into Karnal late in the afternoon. Farid receives his first inkling of what has happened at Delhi that morning at the fruit stall as he buys a bunch of bananas for the old lady who shares his seat. "Oh God," she says when he tells her, "what's to happen now?" A man at the back has a transistor and holds it up with its aerial thrust out of the window. There is a soft, slow music and a lot of static, but no news. Before Panipat, a felled eucalyptus trunk brings the bus to a halt, and half a dozen village boys with lathis clatter up the steps. Farid feels the old woman move by his side. "Get down," she whispers urgently, and then her shawl is over his head, draping his turban and face, shutting out the world. He hears the driver's voice rise in alarm, for they have taken hold of the sick conductor and are trying to drag him out of the bus. The passengers rise in their seats to protest, and the driver guns the engine. Then the bus is off the road, bumping and leaning, churning up the berm, shedding the boys like flies. Farid, extricating himself out of the shawl, is in time to see the last fall backwards like a stuntman, and the conductor, buttoning up his torn shirt, shaking his head as if trying to clear it of a fog. Another protagonist is moving from Banaras with her old father, whom she has taken to Banaras as a pilgrimage, and is bringing him back to Delhi. This is also by train. This is by train. Farid is moving by bus. They had heard in Banaras about the assassination, and the late city edition of the newspaper she had bought on the platform said it was Mrs. Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards who had shot her. But so absorbed had she been in the task of getting her father back home that something like this had hardly passed through her mind. The door shook violently again. It was impossible to think with the racket. Sliding it partially open, she started, "What the?" But they wrenched the handle out of her hand, and in a trice, the little space in the coupe was overrun with men, sticks, rods. They looked under the bunk and were gone, but she had remained for a long time stuck against the corner, as if those few square inches were all that were left for her. "Don't shut the door, they'll only be back again," her father had said, with deathly calmness from his birth. On the platform, a crowd, scores of men, were beating up two Sikhs dragged out of the train. Down the corridor, they were trying to break down the door of the bathroom, shouting to the Sardar they knew who was in there to come out. The other passengers out in the corridor like her, with their faces to the window, were obliged every few minutes to press themselves against the wall as groups of men with sticks and rods ran up and down the narrow passage. One passenger, a man in his 30s, was struck with a cycle chain across the back of his head for not being quick enough to move. I'm a doctor, he mumbled, lurching backwards into his apartment with the blood streaming from him. Outside the bathroom, a boy with thick spectacles was pleading with the crowd. "It's my mother. She's in there. My mother's in the bathroom." "It's not allowed to go to the bathroom at the station," someone pushed him. Despite the nausea that rose in her at the thought of being there in that cramped rectangle of space, she was pushing through and saying in a high-pitched whinny that was not her voice, "There's a lady in there, this boy's mother. Why are you trying to shame her?" "Let her say something then. Let us hear her voice." The man had a red rag tied bandana style across his forehead. "Mother," the young boy put his mouth to the door. "Please speak. Say something." There was silence. Then a breathless squeak. "What am I to say? I am very scared," came from inside. The situation stood poised. There were degrees of doubt and satisfaction on their faces. But outside, the hubbub increased. A new victim had been found. "Let's go," shouted the red bandana, and they thumped out the door. "Who's in there?" Ambika asked the boy. His eyes looked eloquently at her through their thick glass panes. "You better get him out, quick. Someone else is bound to come along." The clatter of another train arriving, slowly shrieking to a halt, the mob regrouping to receive it. On the platform lay 4 bodies, 4 abandoned rag dolls. She just had to look, slow and long, in a vicious, deliberate way, creating the stuff of future nightmares. As she watched, one of them, a Sikh with an army uniform shirt half buttoned over his pajamas, twitched a finger. She ran out, then back to the coupe for a shawl, forgot what she'd come for, and heard her father mumble something about Lahore. He was trying to sit up, and she had to stop to help him. His hand gripped her like a talon. "Under the pillow," he said urgently. "My gun." She freed herself and left him. the kartoos, he was saying, the cartridges. Then what is happening at the moment in Delhi? Because we go into the further story of what is happening. The Farid is dropped outside Gurdwara Majnu Ka Tilla, which was still under construction at that time. And it is on the approach to Delhi. On the third day, and then they defend the Gurdwara against attacks from the slums. On the third day, Shera says he is going to make a break for it after dark. He has friends at the Bangla Sahib Gurdwara who can look after them till the danger is over. Farid agrees to chance it with him. They make it to the interstate bus stop without incident. The roads are deserted. A solitary rickshaw man whom they approach for directions is more scared of them than they are of him. Their confidence grows. The city seems under control, but they can still be picked up for violating curfew. So they keep off the main roads, winding their way into the lanes of Kashmiri Gate. It is a mistake, for neither knows the city. And in the lanes, there is no curfew. Where can the people who live on the streets go? As they circle around in the mesh of streets, they see not a single turban. Increasingly sensitive to the eyes watching them from the corners, from recesses below staircases and balconies, faster and faster they walk, till in response to a collection of small sounds behind them, they break into a headlong run. Immediately there are cries behind them, people calling, the sound of running feet. The alley they run into is blocked by a rickety gate topped with barbed wire. Khoon ka badla khoon. It is the same cry for blood, the battle cry of the slum dwellers. And it comes from so close behind them that as one body, they push the gate till a gap appears and they slip through. Inside, though, they are silent as the breeze. A sentry steps suddenly out of the shadow of a creeper and points a gun at them. Halt, he shouts in military fashion. Who are you? So anyway, the story continues, and we see what happens in Delhi as a result of this. I can't keep on reading everything. These were not riots. We all agree they were not riots. I got a ringside view. I even managed to put a little cameo of myself in the book, because a pregnant woman manages to stop some attacks on Sikhs. That had happened with me. The whole aspect, as far as the Delhi police were concerned, it was a shame for me that I belonged to that force at that time. But it had been also members of the Delhi police who had shot the Prime Minister. So the Delhi police was on the back foot right from the beginning. And it took them so much time to be able to even record FIRs, to do some modicum of justice. When the recording of FIRs, etc., was so poor at that time, to expect that there would be justice and people would be hanged for those murders at a much later date is something anybody who knows the law realizes the difficulties of. That is all I really have to say. I'm quite open to answering any questions or anything. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kawaljit. And I must say that, your narrative and your book basically, is very important, because these are the insider stories. And these are stories of the institutions which actually failed us. And it also counters the official narrative, which has created so much of confusion and has actually made injustice possible. The impunity is because of the official narratives, and your narrative, in fact, gives us an insider's view, and it does open up a lot of things very objectively. Thank you so much. With this, we also move forward to, in fact, a wonderful writer who writes and talks about Urdu literature and its cultural heritage, Saif Mahmood. Saif is a Supreme Court lawyer and he holds a PhD in constitutional law. And as I said, he speaks and writes on Urdu literature and its heritage. Welcome, Saif.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ishmeet. And in fact, while you were just speaking before this, and you said that you don't even know if you identify yourself as a Sikh, I was reminded of Manto's famous words when he was crossing over the border. Pran, his best friend, told him कि भाई तुम ऐसे कौन से मुसलमान हो? तो उन्होंने कहा कि इतना तो हूं कि मारा जा सकूं. So in fact, in the last couple of years, I've also started appreciating for the first time what this means. So thank you for that narrative. Anyway, I was asked to read something in Urdu or from Urdu literature on the shameful, bloody massacre of 1984. Let me say that I am ashamed to report that barring news stories or editorials, hardly anything worthwhile has been written on Urdu, in Urdu on the subject, But Urdu poetry has been used and employed to talk about the pogrom, and I will recite one of those ghazals today. I will also recite a very short 4 or 5 line nazm of Gulzar Sahab, directly on the events of 1984. लेकिन उससे पहले एक बहुत दिलचस्प बात ये सुन लीजिए आप. सरबजोत साहब ने कहा कि ये जो प्रोग्राम था, it can't be seen in isolation. You have to connect the dots historically. आज सुबह ही मैं सहमत सफदर हाशमी मेमोरियल ट्रस्ट में बैठा हुआ सुहेल हाशमी साहब वगैरह से बात कर रहा था, और ये बात निकली कि मुझे आज यहाँ बोलना है इस इवेंट में. कहीं से ये बात निकली कि गालिब के कई खतों से जो उन्होंने 1857 के बारे में लिखे थे, ऐसा लगता है जैसे वो खत 1984 के 1984 के बाद लिखे गए हों. फिर हमने वो खत निकाले, ये मेरे पास 5 वॉल्यूम्स हैं गालिब के खतूत के, उसमें से हमने वो खत ढूंढे. मैं उनमें से 3 खतों में से बहुत छोटे छोटे हिस्से पढ़ूंगा, और आप देखिएगा आपको ऐसा लगेगा कि ये इसी मौके पर लिखे गए हों. वही दर्द, वही वहशत, वही खोने का गम, वही गुस्सा, वही सब नजर आएगा आपको. एंड as the letters progress one after the other in terms of time, you see not only how such events affect our minds and hearts as time passes, but also change the topography of the city with every passing year. ये पहला खत मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ, ये मौलवी अजीजुद्दीन को लिखते हैं गालिब, and this is right after Delhi fell to the British forces, after a bloodbath that lasted for 4 months in 1857. साहिब, कैसी साहबजादों वाली बातें करते हो? दिल्ली को वैसा ही आबाद जानते हो जैसे आगे थी. कासिम जान की गली मीर खैराती के फाटक से फतेहुल्ला बेग के फाटक तक बेचराग है. हाँ, अगर आबादी है तो ये है कि गुलाम हुसैन खां की हवेली अस्पताल है, और जियाउद्दीन खां के कमरे में एक डॉक्टर साहब रहते हैं, और काले साहब के मकानों में एक साहिब आलीशान इंग्लिस्तान तशरीफ रखते हैं. लाल कुएं के मोहल्ले में खाक उड़ती है, आदमी का नाम नहीं. मोहल्ले के मोहल्ले तबाह हो बर्बाद हो गए. अहले शहर की जमीयत में फर्क आ गया है, और ये हालत हुई है कि बस सब कुछ बहा के ले गया. आया था एक सैलाब सा. ये पहला खत है. ये फौरन 1857 के बाद लिखा गया है. मैंने खुद देखा है 84 में हमारे घर के सामने किस तरह से ऐसी बड़ी बड़ी नई बनाई हुई कोठियां पंचशील पार्क, पंचशील इनक्लेव में उनको हथिया लिया गया. जब लोग वहां से भाग के चले गए, द सिख ओनर्स, उनको हथिया लिया गया और वापस नहीं किया गया. तो ये जो ये कह रहे हैं कि वो मकानों में, फलास के मकान में एक साहिब इंग्लिस्तान तशरीफ रखते हैं, दिस इज अबाउट यूसर्पेशन ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी. खैर, इसके कुछ महीने के बाद मिर्जा हरगोपाल तुफ्ता को लिखते हैं. अब जरा इसमें थोड़ा सा बदलाव देखिएगा आप, कि ये कोई ना समझे कि मैं अपनी बेरौनकी और तबाही के गम में मरता हूं. जो दुख मुझको है उसका बयान तो मालूम, मगर उस बयान की तरफ इशारा करता. अंग्रेजी कौम में से जो इन रूसिया कालों के हाथ मारे गए, उसमें कोई मेरा उम्मीदगार था, और कोई मेरा शफीक, और कोई मेरा दोस्त, और कोई मेरा यार, और कोई मेरा शागिर्द. हिंदुस्तानियों में कुछ अजीज, कुछ दोस्त, कुछ शागिर्द, कुछ माशूक. सो वो सब के सब खाक में मिल गए. एक अजीज का मातम कितना सख्त होता है, جو اتنے عزیزوں کا ماتمدار ہو اس کو زیست کیوں کرنا دشوار ہو. ہائے اتنے یار مارے گئے کہ جب میں مروں گا تو میرا کوئی رونے والا بھی نہ ہوگا. انا للہ و انا الیہ راجعون. یہ خط لکھتے ہیں جون یا جولائی 1858 کو. اب اس کے 3 سال کے بعد ایک چھوٹا سا خط ذرا یہ اور دیکھ لیجیے اور اس میں آپ دیکھیے کہ اور کیا بدلاؤ آیا ہے. یہ خط لکھا جا رہا ہے 3 سال کے بعد 23 مئی 1861 اور یہ شروع یہاں سے ہو رہا ہے کہ او میاں سید زادہ آزادہ دلی کے عاشق دلدادہ ڈہے ہوئے اردو بازار کے رہنے والے حسد سے لکھنؤ کو برا کہنے والے نہ دل میں مہر و آزرم نہ آنکھ میں حیا و شرم. نظام الدین سب ختم ہو گئے ان کے دوست سب ختم ہو گئے ہیں. نظام الدین خان کہاں ذوق کہاں مومن کہاں ایک آزردہ سو خاموش دوسرا غالب وہ بے خود و مدہوش. نہ سخنوری رہی نہ سخندانی کس برتے پہ تتا پانی آئے دلی وائے دلی بھاڑ میں جائے دلی. یہ ٹرائالوجی ہے ان خطوں کی. بہرحال اب میں ایک جو میں ذکر کر رہا تھا گلزار صاحب کی نظم کا بہت چھوٹی سی نظم ہے وہ پڑھے دے رہا ہوں. ابھی سنیل بھائی نے کہا سنیل مہرا صاحب نے there are some wounds that refuse to go away. یہ اسی پر ہے. اس کا نام ہے اخبار. اخبار اٹھایا تو کچھ چھوٹی چھوٹی خبریں گود میں آن گری. ڈسٹ بن میں پھینکے ہوئے ایک بچے کو ایک کتیا نے 3 دن تک دودھ پلا کر زندہ رکھا. پھر لوگ لے گئے. دن رات وہیں پنجے سے اب وہ کوڑا کوریدا کرتی ہے. پاسپورٹ کمشنر نے درخواست سے سر اٹھا کر پوچھا کوئی تل یا مسا کوئی تیرے بدن پہ جن نشانی کوئی نشان جو مٹ نہ سکے. چند منٹ کچھ سوچا پھر سردار نے یکدم شرٹ اتاری. آگ کا ایک نشان ہے سر جی 84 کا یہ مٹ نہیں سکتا. یہ ہے گلزار. اور ایک آخری چیز میں پیش کے دے رہا ہوں. میں ابھی کچھ دنوں پہلے ڈاکٹر سلمان اختر سے بات کر رہا تھا ان دی کانٹیکسٹ آف کمیونل پوگرامز اینڈ میسیکرز. اور جانثار اختر صاحب کے صاحبزادے جو کہ بہت اچھے سائیکو تھراپسٹ ہیں اور بہت اچھے اردو اور انگریزی کے شاعر ہیں, انہوں نے اپنے والد جانثار اختر کا ایک شعر سنایا جو میں نے نہیں سنا تھا اس سے پہلے. پھر میں نے جا کے پوری غزل دیکھی. غزل پیش کر رہا ہوں. زمیں ہوگی کسی قاتل کا داماں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. زمیں ہوگی کسی قاتل کا داماں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اکارت جائے گا خون شہیداں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اکارت از ویسٹ بیکار. زمیں ہوگی کسی قاتل کا داماں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اکارت جائے گا خون شہیداں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اور علاج چاک کے پیراہن ہوا تو اس طرح ہوگا. علاج چاک کے پیراہن ہوا تو اس طرح ہوگا. سیا جائے گا کانٹوں سے گریباں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اور ترانے یہ شعر دیکھیے گا کہ ترانے یہ 84 کے لیے بھی صحیح ہے, یہ آج کے لیے بھی ویسے کا ویسا ہی صحیح ہے کہ ترانے کچھ دیے لفظوں میں خود کو قید کر لیں گے. ترانے کچھ دیے لفظوں میں خود کو قید کر لیں گے. عجب انداز سے پھیلے گا زندہ ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اور کوئی اتنا نہ ہوگا لاش بھی لے جا کے دفنا دے. کوئی اتنا نہ ہوگا لاش بھی لے جا کے دفنا دے. انہی سڑکوں پہ مر جائے گا انسان ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اور نظر لپٹی ہے شولوں میں لہو تپتا ہے آنکھوں میں. نظر لپٹی ہے شولوں میں لہو تپتا ہے آنکھوں میں. اٹھا ہی چاہتا ہے کوئی طوفان ہم نہ کہتے تھے. اور آخری شعر لکھنؤ کے لیے ہے لیکن وہ اتنا ہی صحیح ہے دلی کے لیے. 84 کے دلی کے لیے اتنا لکھنؤ کے لیے صحیح تھا کہ چھلکتے جام میں بھیگی ہوئی آنکھیں اتر آئیں. چھلکتے جام میں بھیگی ہوئی آنکھیں اتر آئیں. ستائے گی کس دن یاد یاراں ہم نہ کہتے تھے. یہ صاحب جانثار اختر ہیں اور یہ لکھا گیا تھا 1970s میں. کس کو پتا تھا that he was prophesying about 1984. Thank you very much. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. And now I have been asked to introduce, and I have the honor to introduce someone who actually doesn't need any introduction, not least to this audience, Nafta Singh Sarna, a well-known author, columnist, diplomat who has served as Indian ambassador to the United States and to Israel, and as our High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. A very eminent writer who has translated Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Zafarnama. And if I am allowed to add a personal note, ये एक शेर है ना साहब अकबर इलाहाबादी का कि पैदा हुए वकील तो शैतान ने कहा लो आज हम भी साहिब औलाद हो गए. एक बार मुझसे किसी ने कहा था कि ये शेर वकील पे नहीं है, वकील के बाप पे है. सो सरना साहब.
शुक्रिया सैफ, और बहुत खूब सुनाया आपने. और जैसे मैंने कहा कि अभी आपकी किताब खत्म की तो ये खास मजा आया आपको सुन के. और दिल्ली में जो खून खराबा हुआ है, चाहे 57 में हो चाहे 84 में हो, आपसे बेहतर कोई क्या कहेगा. I was also in 84, like Kamalji, Deolji, I was also in government. And I did have personal experiences, but that's not what I want to talk about today. I would simply like to read a short story which I wrote 7 years later. And without any planning, the short story came out reflecting what Professor Sarbjot and Sunil Mehra have both said today in their poem and in the appeal, in the passionate appeal that Sunil put out, was how 84 is not in isolation, how partition and 84 have conflated in the souls and the hearts of so many of us who have either directly or through our immediately previous generation felt this connection. So this was a story which was written in 90 or 91 and was published then outside. And then it's called A Death in Winter. And you might see reflections of what Professor Sarbjot's poem when he says, Shahar Jangal Ho Gaya. So some of that may come in and some things. So I'll seek your indulgence in reading the full story because otherwise it won't make any sense. It's called A Death in Winter. It was on a yellow hot afternoon that we went to cremate my grandmother with a kind of heat that makes you wish fervently under your breath for a death in winter. Nothing, not even grief, makes much sense in that kind of heat. When the roads give off whiffs of steam and the frame of the car window makes red scalding marks on your sweating forearm. A death in winter would be so much more sensible and decorous. The ice under the body would not melt away so fast into meaningless rivulets. The flowers would last a little longer, and it would be altogether more sad. It would give a proper chance to everybody, the aunts and the cousins, sisters and brothers, to grieve. Nobody could grieve in that burning yellow afternoon. Not properly, I mean. Everyone was wilting by the time the black van pulled up at the gate. The driver got out, opened the back doors and waited, a doleful expression on his face. He had a rolled up handkerchief under his grimy white open collar. The sweat had drenched the handkerchief and was now coursing into his vest. I remember with a strange clarity the way the drops glistened on the hair on his chest as I pushed past him, holding the body by the legs. Unlike what one would have thought, it had seemed all too simple, cold, and mindless. Wrapping the white sheet around the body, putting it on the wooden stretcher, and then tying up the middle and the feet. There had been no protests from that once all-powerful body, not even a single murmur of dissent. I remembered my aunt telling me once that the old lady's beauty and strength had been well known in the frontier towns where she had spent her youth before the partition of the country. And once when a towering, fierce Pathan Tongawala had tried to abduct her, she had stood up in the Tonga as it rushed downhill and fought with him until she had snatched away his whip and brought the Tonga to a halt. There was no strength now in the dead heap, which we pushed away in sad, tired silence. Hurriedly, the driver shut the doors of the van, and my aunts and cousins muffled their sobs. There was not a whiff of wind that afternoon to stir the huge amalthas tree with its bright yellow flowers and dark brown rod-like pods, under whose shadow she had lived for 20 years. Everything was shrouded in a torpor of senseless heat. As we stood around the pyre and helplessly watched the flames consume her, I thought that her death actually belonged not to that summer, but to the strange and blighted winter that had preceded it. She had, in any case, stopped living since that late October night, since that horrible shriek in the dark. And it would have been better if she had died then. Then, not only would we have been able to grieve properly, we would also have been able to dismiss her death as part of that cursed winter in which so many had been written off. And we would have been able to remember her properly, like we had always seen her, ruddy, healthy, authoritative. I was the eldest of 16 grandchildren that she saw growing up, and I received the most of her love and indulgence. I liked the days when she would sit down on the double bed in the shaded bedroom in summer, or on the old sofas in the sunny winter veranda, and talk of the time when I was a little child. I loved to hear the story and watch my envious cousins hear it, of the little tricycle my uncle had brought for me from Bombay, and now how I insisted on filling petrol in it in every corner of the room, and of the day when she had made the mistake of taking me to a butcher's shop, after which I was so miserable that I stopped eating meat till I was 11. And it made me proud to hear that when she had taken me for long walks near the Safdarjung Hospital, which in those days was called American Hospital, there were no colonies beyond that point, only rock and gravel and thorny bushes and jackals. I was the only one who had free access to a room, the citadel from which she ruled the family with a benevolent but firm hand. As I walked in and out of that room while my younger cousins watched from the door, it was impossible for me to believe that someday she would leave that citadel unguarded forever, leave the 100 smells of that room, of dry fruits, of old perfume in round glass bottles with faded blue spherical dispensers stashed away in locked steel trunks, of expensive bath soaps, and simply go away, wrapped up unceremoniously in a sheet. To me, it had seemed that her reign over the citadel and my unchallenged access to it would last forever. Such was the strength in her voice and the color in her cheeks and the determination in her walk. There was none of the other grandmother paraphernalia that I had seen in the houses of my friends. There were no sick beds, no bedpans, no nurses coming to give pain-killing injections every alternate evening on alternating arms, no cataract operations or green eye patches, not even a walking stick. Instead, there was a relentless routine as unbending as it was leisurely. There would be early morning prayers followed by a glass of milk with dry fruit. Then she would walk 2 kilometers to the Gurdwara on the hill, which she had helped in every way she could to grow from a small wooden shed with a solitary gas lamp to an imposing gilded structure of marble and teak. She would be back for a light lunch cooked by one of her daughters-in-law, and then she would sleep through the afternoon. In the evening, she would go down the street with Mrs. Khanna to the park with 4 sections and a central fountain. After 2 rounds of the park, they would sit on the bench near the fountain and talk until it was time for the evening prayers. And after dinner, she always ate fruit, melon or mango or apple, and admonished any grandchild who dared complain that the fruits were not just juicy or sweet or tasty enough. I also had an idea, unlike my cousins, that she had not always been like this, so happy, healthy, and commanding. I had heard, during my privileged presence in her room, whispered conversations of the dark days after the partition of the country. I knew something too about the photo album with the green and golden paisley binding, which lay wrapped in a blue muslin cloth in the lowest drawer of the cupboard. In those black and white faded photographs taken by my father in the early 50s, she looked very different, older than she did this winter, 30 years on. She has a hunted, fixed expression, and her face with its deep-set eyes and sunken, hollow cheeks is scary. She looks like a cardboard cutout, a two-dimensional figure from whom the spirit has fled. She looks weak and sick, poor and hopeless. Once in a while, she showed me those photographs and quietly told me how they had survived the murderous frenzy of the birth pangs of freedom. Nobody dared to talk of those days openly in the family because my father had seen the killing and savagery so close that he would break out into a cold sweat if somebody as much as mentioned a word. But I think she felt the eldest grandchild had a right to know, some right to keep alive memories, however gruesome, so that they were not all swallowed up irretrievably by the gathering years. So sometimes in whispers, she told me of those last weeks in Rawalpindi, where the season of axes and swords and daggers had set in. She told me how they had hidden under beds from killing mobs, how they had moved from house to house, escaping senseless death at every turn, and how finally they had come out with only the clothes on their backs on one of the last chartered planes that flew out of Rawalpindi. She told me how she found on arrival that the same axes were out in Delhi, and the streets on which she had expected joy and freedom and flowers had the same desolation, the killing and the protesting, screaming, grotesque dead. She told me about the horror of waiting for my father and my grandfather stuck in a locked-up office in Rawalpindi, and of fading hope as the days passed, until one day they knocked on the door and walked in, trembling. And only once did she tell me of her newlywed daughter whom she had left behind, and of whom there would never be another word, only one haunting photograph in that album. So I understood why the album, with its mysterious photographs, was always hidden away. It was a trick to sustain the miracle of survival. The miracle was shattered that morning of the last day of October in 1984. It should have been just another day in the normal, exciting beginning of a Delhi winter, with all its promise of cold, bright joyousness. But that morning had ensured, in one dark moment, that there would be no thought that winter for love or play, or for the flowers in the concrete traffic circles. An ugly cloud had loomed over the city that morning, and a shadowy, cancerous anger was spreading through its lanes. By evening, there were news of riots and killings on Ring Road, of cars being stopped and burnt, of houses being attacked and the men pulled out and killed. And across the slow river, the fires were rising. The family sat and watched television, but the news came by telephone, which rang every few minutes. There was no knowing what would happen through the night as the fear and the frenzy increased. My grandmother sat silently. She completed her evening prayers and said, "Let us all go to Mrs. Khanna's house. We will be safe there." So the house was locked up, and furtively the entire family moved into Mrs. Khanna's house and huddled into the two back rooms. In the dark, I stole up to the terrace and saw the fires light up the corners of the night, reminding me of the time when the magical strobe of the old Safdarjung aerodrome used to explore the dark night and guide the planes in. Delhi had once again dissolved into rock and thorn, haunted by jackals. When I rushed down and told my grandmother of the fires, I saw that the color had gone out of her cheeks, and she looked much older than I could ever remember. She put a tired hand on my shoulder, told me to go to sleep, and turned to pray. All night we waited for the mob and hoped it would not come. I do not recall if I slept at all. It must have been very late when we heard the shouting, the gaulish laughter, the clapping, and the unceasing wail from the horn of a car stuck as it burnt. The mob was close to the house as we huddled in the darkness. I felt a cold hand around my heart, and a fear, and an indescribable, mindless fear passed over me. And then, as if from next door, I heard a horrible scream. It rose, it hung in the night air, and descended into 100 piercing echoes. It tore the night into shreds. It went through my bones like a sword and left me trembling. Then the mob had passed, leaving Mrs. Khanna's house untouched. In the first light of early dawn, I looked at my grandmother's face and saw the fixed, hunted expression that I had seen only in those old photographs. Her eyes had sunk and her skin was ashen gray. She seemed to be in a trance, and I thought she was praying. But she was only repeating mindlessly, "They are coming again. Hide the children, everybody hide." That day, she did not come out of that trance, nor when she moved back to her house and into her room. Her routine fell apart. There was no daily walk to the Gurdwara, and even Mrs. Khanna could not make her go to the park. She sat in her bed all day, looking endlessly at that single photograph of her lost daughter in the old album. They took you away and they're coming again. This time you hide, all of you hide. Then 5 months later, when that cursed winter had turned into a yellow summer, she stopped breathing. It would have been much better if she had died in the winter, killed by that terrible scream. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nateji. I think this is an amazingly chilling story. I still have some goose flesh, and thank you for doing it. I mean, it's extremely beautiful. With this, I invite Professor Rachel Bari. Professor Rachel Bari is a professor of English at Coimbatore University, Shimoga, Karnataka. She has a lot of publications. She's a wonderful poet. She's contributed to Kannada Encyclopedia, which has been published by Kannada University, Hampi. And she's been working on concerns related to women and violence. And I need to mention here that she's a beautiful human being. Ma'am, the stage is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Ishmeet. It's lovely and wonderful to see you again. Good evening to a distinguished group of ladies and gentlemen, and I feel truly privileged to be a part of this journey of yours. Ishmeet, thanks for bringing me here. Thanks for making me listen to all of you and making me a part of your journey, a journey I have not traversed, either in person or through memories. A journey and memory which cannot be erased and will remain faithful. But I believe that writing about it, begins the process of healing, and one needs to heal. What we bequeath to posterity should be healthy hearts and minds. Thank you once again for bringing me here. As Professor Sarjit Singh said, we cannot see this event in isolation. I don't even know whether the vocabulary that I'm going to use is suitable to this time, the feeling, the emotion that goes with it, because it is not a riot, it is something much, much more. And I can only relate to it as a person, as a citizen of this country, because I see it happening even now to different people in different ways. And I am caught at that crossroads because I am a Christian, I am a minority, married to another minority. And today, at what is happening in this country today, I fear for our children. I fear for the generation which is coming, and what is the kind of country that we give to them. I know this is a very political statement that I'm making, but this is the platform where we can really speak to others, speak to everybody, and then maybe pass a message. I would like to read, when Ishmeet told me to be on this program, I was a bit confused. In what capacity can I be there? I'm not a participant. I've been so darkly oblivious to what was happening in the northern part of India, having lived in South India all my life. And the only experience that I've had was on October 31st. I was a final year BA student, and we had gone for a picnic, and we heard the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and we had to come back, and there was all chaos everywhere in a small town in Shimoga. And after which, of course, we've heard a lot of things happening here and there, but I have never witnessed anything. I've not been a participant anywhere. As I said, so darkly oblivious to what was happening. It's only after I went to Gujarat for a 2-year deputation, met up with Dr. Ishmeet Kaur, an equally wonderful human being who really opened up this world of pain to me. And I realized that as an Indian, we ought to know what is really happening in this in this country. I mean, she asked me to write for her. As a student of literature, all I could do was maybe contribute in terms of an imagination, a story. I write as a woman and I write as a mother because, as I said, I fear for children who come tomorrow. And my short story is titled It Doesn't Matter Either. It's in this wonderful book brought out by Schmidt. And it's about the rape of a young girl. And I've written about it from four different perspectives. That of the parents, that of the victim, that of the reporter, and that of the policeman. So these are four systems, ideas, emotions, intellectual ideology that is there within what I wanted to say. So I'll just read small portions of it. She was 18, young and beautiful, with a fair, chubby, cherubic face. She was the adored one in the family, Jasmine. The corpse in front of them was not her. She could not be dead. Not like this. Her mother approached the body and slowly removed the white cloth over her face. She shrieked. Her husband, old and distraught, came and sat at her side. His old eyes could only see the bloodied face of his daughter, if at all it was his daughter. And when the policemen, take away the body, they say, "Where are you taking the body? She needs to be cleaned. Gurudwara, cremated properly," said the distraught mother. The smirk on the face of the policeman was open and mocking. "Cremation? We will give you what is left of this body." The old man and woman watched the body of the beloved child being dragged away like an animal. The old woman's motherly instincts and years of fear and protection brought her to her feet, and she ran after the cart when she saw that the wind had lifted the cloth. The coolie hired to drag the cart stopped, confused. The policeman pulled the woman back. She only said, "Cover her, cover her." The policeman guffawed at the old woman. "She is dead, woman. You can cover her when you cremate her." The next portion is actually the experience of the girl herself, where she tries to escape the mob and she turns into an alley and she trips over somebody there, and she thinks that somebody is going to help her, and we don't know what happens. The next scene is she waking up in the police station and she has been raped, and she has a broken knee and she's unable to sit up and talk and respond in any way. The third aspect, the third perspective is that of the reporter who wants to report on what has happened. And, he talks to the policeman. He wants to know, "Plotters?" he asked. "Arey Saheb, what do we say? They were running. We caught them. How can you trust anybody nowadays? And turbans of all things. We have orders, you see." And the girl? She was with them. We recovered bits and pieces of papers from their bodies. She had a few tucked, nowhere, but we took them. And for the reporter, it's a dilemma to write whatever he has seen. But he begins by saying, the year 1984 will go down in history as the worst year in India. The final perspective is that of what happens in the police station when the whole episode has taken place. And the evening shift was special. They were gloating over their prize, and surely they would join the ranks of loyal people. Fewer sirens and fewer orders with few words. They were sitting, sipping their streaming chai from broken porcelain cups. "You seem to be satisfied," said one. "Yes, for now." "She was easy, wasn't she?" "Yeah, how could it not be? She broke her knee. Where would she go?" A cynical smile was the only response. "Was she with them?" "Oh no, she was returning from tuition. I see her every day. She lives across my street. When the riots broke out, she came running to me for help. I helped her." The smile which spread over his face was lecherous. She tripped over me in the alley where I was hiding. I helped her. He remembered how he had seen surprise and fear in her eyes as he had torn her clothes. He had heard the click of bone breaking as she tried to knee him when he broke her. But she is sick. Who cares? In these times, it doesn't matter either. As I said, I write as a woman, I write as a mother. And this short story actually tries to talk about the failure of a system, the intellectual coma that all of us are in, even today in this country, where everybody is silent, quiet to whatever is taking place. There is not much murmur that is coming out. It happened then, it's happening now. Ishmeet, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Actually, this story has been one of my favorite stories too. And as I said earlier, that we move beyond the scope of community itself or victimization of community, because it talks to us about how everybody is threatened, when there is a situation or an event of violence around all of us. So there have been mistaken identities as well. And as Seth was speaking and also talking about the narrative within the moving trains and people being killed here. So one of my friends wrote a play, and in that he had written a song, ki ye wala Singh ya wo wala Singh. So a lot of people were killed because they just carried a Singh surname, and they were actually Singhs from UP, or they were Singhs from other places. So they were not even Sikhs. And something very important, that I'll just take half a second to bring it up, is that the sad aspect of 84 is that nobody has ever spoken about the multiple rapes. That's a narrative which is kind of lost. And women could not speak about it. There were no formal FIRs. We don't have an official narrative around it. We don't have women talking to us about it. Very few women came up with their experiences, but it happened. And we all know the intensity of it, that it happened. So maybe some of these stories, even if they are fictionalized, they become very powerful for us. And this is how they bring up the she experience, the woman experience. Thank you for doing this, ma'am. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Gurmeher. Gurmeher Kaur is a radio and online video broadcaster who has worked in India, UK, Dubai, and more recently in US. She spends her time between India and US. She has also studied Indian history, mass communication. She has studied radio at Cardiff University, and she's also done screenwriting from New York Film Academy. Her areas of interest are creative inquiry, and her work includes Urdu, Punjabi, and South Asian English literature and poetry, Hindi cinema, music, ghazal, qawwali, South Asian folk music, new media and connectivity, and interfaith solidarity. So over to you, Gurmeher.
बहुत शुक्रिया Ishmeet. Thank you so much. सारियां नु सत श्री अकाल, आदाब, namaste. Thank you, Majha House, for this very, sort of life-affirming platform where we can explore such themes. And it was so heartening to see that everybody's approach, all the speakers, they were so eloquent, so evocative, and endlessly moving. And we're here to, हम जख्मों को कुरेदने नहीं आए, हम खिराज अकीदत पेश करने आए हैं, श्रद्धांजलि देने आए हैं, यादों को तराशने आए हैं, to chisel our memories into some kind of shape so that they gain power and momentum in our quest for justice. तो ये हक की आवाज बुलंद करने आए हैं, इंसाफ का मुतालबा है, न्याय की गुहार है, लेकिन जख्मों को कुरेदना हमारा इरादा नहीं है, which is not to say that इंसाफ की गुहार ना लगाई जाए. तो आप सबों का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया कि आपने अपने ख्यालात साझे किए. And I was going to open with something else, but I just must read out a comment that one of our dear friends from Pakistan, Farooq Mehboob Khan Saab, has written in the comments section, which really is so on point, जिसे कहते हैं. Let me just bring it up. Because I feel that's the heart of it, He says, Farooq says that partition के तकसीम के बंटवारे के घाव हैं ये सब, The success of communal politics has given rise to fissures that have become gulfs. To which I said in the comment section that I agree with your broad point, Farooq Saab, God's children all, or Bakol Shair, roye asiviyan, roye tu sivio. तो ये नजरिया हमारा नहीं है कि ये दुश्मन है, ये दोस्त है, दुश्मन का दुश्मन दोस्त होता है. ये सब तकसीम मुसलसल हम नहीं करते रहेंगे ज़हन दिल की. We are all God's children. और सरबद्दा भला जो है हमारे मजहब का अकीदा भी है. और ये उसके बाद फारूक साहब ने ये कहा कि गुरमेहर जी खुल के रोए भी नहीं है असी पे, नाल नाल पाकिस्तान हिंदुस्तान दे नारे भी लगांदे रहे हैं, हिसाब ना लिया ना दिया. So I wanted to open with that. And other than that, so much has been said by very illustrious people who have on-ground experience, people from Kamaljeet Saiba from the police force, Nafta Sarna Sahib, and so many people, who have, and it shows that we all have people from all sides of the story in our own families, in our own khandans. So it is not about othering people, and it is not about, putting up a face and throwing darts at that face, ki ye aisi thi, wo aisa था. It is about the system. निजाम ऐसा है जहाँ पे इस तरह के सानहे, इस तरह की बातें, इस तरह that is what brings about this kind of tragedy. So I have 3 or 4 quick points that I want to make that are not on the face of it directly related to the events that happened in 84, but they are all about what it means to be a Sikh. And I will attempt to then tie them all up together with those fateful days in 1984. So, and I also, because I do believe that the personal is the political. So just give me a little bit of rope here and I will attempt to tie it all up together. That is just the approach I'm taking. So the first thing I want to say is that, off late, the Sikh community has got some coverage in the media for work that are, the seva that the Sikh community does, the langars in gurdwaras and things like that. Those things have gotten some press, and that consciousness amongst people is growing ki Sikh log ye nek kaam karte hain. So that is heartening to see. That recognition or that empathy is heartening to see. And I'm not making a case for Sikh exceptionalism ki hum pe hi sare zulm hue hain. Every community, every individual in his or her lifetime, every community is sometimes, the perpetrator, sometimes the victim. But I just want to say this because, I also work in the interfaith solidarity space in a modest way. And I want to also engage with non-Sikhs. I may be a Sikh myself, but I want to engage with non-Sikhs. And I want to just quickly say that, please try to understand what it's like to have been a people who were the butt of jokes for decades. I mean, some people may think that's a very trivial thing, but we were a people who were the butt of jokes for decades, not just in India and Pakistan too. We were the butt of invasions. We faced the trauma, the rupture of the partition, the 84 pogrom, and now, of course, even the farmers' movement is there for everyone to see. So, and beyond that, I don't want to, the Christian people, our Christian brothers and sisters have 10 commandments. I think Sikhs we have 1 commandment, that thou shalt not whine. So we are not whiners, but I just wanted to quickly flag that. So I wanted to say, that, like I said, that people, it is becoming part of public consciousness ki gurdwaron mein ye hota hai, langar hota hai, seva hoti hai. But I just wanted to drive that point home to its logical conclusion in the context of today's times, because as they say, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. That in today's times, in today's India, एक ऐसी जगह है, एक ऐसा मुकद्दस इदारा है, एक हमारे गुरुद्वारा जिसे हम कहते हैं, जहाँ पे न सिर्फ आप एक टूरिस्ट के तौर पे जा सकते हैं, आप अकीदत के जज्बे से, श्रद्धा के जज्बे से जा सकते हैं, आप लंगर का सादा खाना खाने जा सकते हैं, और अगर आप पे तशद्दुद हो रहा हो, if you are being oppressed, if your life is in danger, you can enter a gurdwara and no one will ask you whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim. You will not be asked to see कौन हो, तुसी हिंदू हो, सिख हो, मुसलमान हो, ये आपसे नहीं पूछा जाएगा. तो ये मैं कोई बड़ी इनकलाबी सनसनीखेज बात नहीं कह रही हूँ, कोई खुलासा नहीं कर रही हूँ, लेकिन I just wanted to drive that point home कि आज के दौर में ये एक तरह से इनकलाबी बात ही है, और कितनी empowering, कितनी heartening बात है कि गुरुद्वारा एक ऐसा इदारा है, and that is the number one reason why I choose to be a Sikh. Of course, Sikhism is not just a bridge between Hindus and Muslims, but it is a central part of our approach and the beating heart of our faith. Of course, we are not just an amalgamation of the Sufi thought and the Bhakti tradition. We are more than that. There is Sikhi has its own glory and splendor, but it is the beating heart of our faith to be inclusive, and I think that is what is something I hold on to in these trying times. One of the things I wanted to say from my own life experience and then extend it to the universal is that I'm a Fauji kid. Like I said, that we've heard speakers from the police force, from elsewhere. सबके खानदानों में हर तरह इस कहानी के हर रुख के किरदार हैं. So I'm a Fauji kid. I am pro-Jawan but anti-war. I'm pro the Pakistani Jawan, I'm pro the Indian Jawan, but I'm anti-war. I see no contradiction in that. I see no confusion in that. Because I believe that we need to critique the mechanisms that create war, that create communal strife, that create pogroms, that create all of these kinds of things. तो मेरी जो बचपन की यादें हैं वो यही हैं कि जब हम दिल्ली से पंजाब जाते थे तो पंजाब छुट्टियों में रिश्तेदारियां निभाने या तबादला होता था मेरे वालिद साहब का, किसी भी वजह से जाते थे. पंजाब वो सूबा था जहाँ पे पेट्रोल पंप पे, गैस स्टेशन पे मंजी को आगे निकाल के हमें लस्सी दी जाती थी, और ये किसी नॉट अंडर ड्यूरेस, ये इंसानियत का नाता था हमारा. And this is what I is so heartening. And like I said, I am pro the Jawan, but I am anti-war. And I see no contradiction in all of this, in this approach. And like I said, I don't want to throw darts at individuals. It's about the system, it's about the nizam, it's about the structure that perpetuates war. One other thing I want to say, and these are very simple day-to-day examples from our lives, but this is just to kind of make Sikhs more real. We are more than just Balle Balle and Karan Johar's Bollywood films. So one other thing I want to say is that as a Delhi girl, because of the rupture that happened, that Punjab has witnessed over the centuries, and then most recently in 84 and then even later, there's the agricultural crisis, there's the drug problem, the alcoholism, there's the flight of the youth. We are now all over the world. I myself am a Delhi girl, born and raised there, but now speaking to you from the US. So, मेरे दोस्त अहबाब दिल्ली में हैं, चंडीगढ़ में हैं, लाहौर में हैं, मेलबर्न में हैं, टोरंटो में हैं, लेकिन इस सब में, इन सब जगहों में दोस्त अहबाब सहेलियां होने के बावजूद जो होशियारपुर का सरदार है या सिखनी है, जो तरन तारन का है, कहीं ना कहीं मुझे हमेशा ये लगा, although I'm a big city girl, कहीं ना कहीं मुझे हमेशा ये लगा कि एक खालिसपन, एक पंजाबियत उनमें थी और है, जो शायद हम चंडीगढ़ दिल्ली वालों में उतनी नहीं है जितनी वो छोटे शहर के पंजाबियों में और गांव में मिलती है. मतलब मैं दिल्ली की भी बात करती हूँ, मैं दिल्ली गर्ल, लाइक आई सेड, मैं जीके और जोरबाग में हमेशा थोड़ा एलियनेटेड मैंने महसूस किया. प्रीतमपुरा और त्रिलोकपुरी, वहां पे भी सरदार बसते हैं, और वही सरदार थे जिनकी मैं वो मंजर कशी नहीं करना चाहती कि क्या कुछ हुआ 84 में. मैं तो बहुत छोटी थी तब, लेकिन जो सुना देखा सबने सुना है, तो वो त्रिलोकपुरी की मैं बात कर रही हूँ, प्रीतमपुरा की मैं बात कर रही हूँ, जहां से मैकेनिक, मेहनत कश सरदार, सिकनिया जिनको घसीटा गया, और वो सब, मतलब बदमज़गी फैलाने की बात नहीं है, लेकिन बात ये कि कौन क्या करता है, कौन हुक्मरान क्या करता है, कौन जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक जो रसाकशी है, एजेंसीज के, इदारों के काम, एजेंसीज के काम, कोई मुल्क आपके मुल्क में जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक डेप्थ चाहता है, एंड आई ऑलवेज मेक अ डिस्टिंक्शन बिटवीन द स्टेट एंड द पीपल, लेकिन पिसता कौन है, मरता कौन है. और इसका मैं आखिर में मैं अपनी बात को खत्म करने से पहले यही कहूंगी कि हाल ही में मुझसे मेरी एक दोस्त से बात हो रही थी. मेरे एक दोस्त हैं, दुबई में होते हैं, तो मेरी लाहौर के हैं वैसे बुनियादी तौर पे, तो मेरी उनसे बात हो रही थी और हमने बात की बाबरी मस्जिद की शहादत की और ये सब, और उसके बाद जो कुछ हिंदुस्तान में गुजरा है, कि अब बाबर कब हिंदुस्तान में बाबर आया, बाबर ने क्या किया, उसका जुम्मन दर्जी, रिजवान नाई, जमाल बुनकर, इन सब से क्या लेना देना. इन सब से क्या लेना देना, जिन्होंने उसका हर्जाना भुगता। हमको पता भी नहीं कि बाबर ने क्या किया क्या नहीं किया शर्तिया तौर पे, ना आप मौजूद थे ना हम मौजूद थे, लेकिन इस सब की लुबे लुबाब ये, to sum up, I will only say that we must bear in mind that it is these average, so-called average common people who suffered in 84. It doesn't matter what their religious affiliation was. So बहुत shukriya aap sabka for giving me the time and space to speak. Shukriya ji, Rab rakha.
Yeah, thank you, Gurmeer. I think, I mean, there's no point in disagreeing that, yes, it is the common citizens, who tend to bear the brunt of all kinds of political violences that we tend to see around us. With this, and we are really running short of time, but we do have two very, very important people to speak to us at a conversation which we've been waiting for, between Ravi Singh and Ujjal Dosanjh. Let me quickly introduce them. Ujjal has written extensively on Canadian and Indian issues. His autobiography, Journey After Midnight, was published in Canada and India in 2016. It made it to the bestseller list in the British Columbia and Canada. He's a lifelong activist on equality and social justice, and as well as a vocal opponent of violence, sectarianism, and extremism in public life. Ravi Singh is an independent publisher and a co-founder of a very reputed publishing house, Speaking Tiger. The stage is all yours, Ravi and Ujjal, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dosanjh. You've been patient, and also I think it's very early in the morning there. But what I wanted to do really was to talk about, because I know your book, which Ishmeet mentioned, Journey After Midnight, your memoir, where you have written about many things, but also about the events of '84 and how they played out, in a sense, in Canada, the Sikh diaspora there, but also what was happening before that, during that, after that. And in that sense, I think to look at the question of how is injustice and brutality, what can be a strong, sustainable, and, for lack of a better word, moral response to violence and to brutality. How do you seek justice? According to you, what is the way to seek justice? And also to keep the memory alive, but in a way which doesn't perpetuate the same violence. And so I just want to, just give a brief kind of the idea of the territory that I thought that we could traverse when we're talking. But before that, before we come to that, can I just start with a question? How alive is the issue there in Canada among the Sikhs there, and what is this the continuing sense of justice, the search for justice? What is it like there?
The issue in Canada, obviously, like the rest of the Western world and the diaspora. First of all, the events of 1984 or pre-84, I think that we sitting outside experienced them somewhat differently. We, of course, saw the bloodshed, we felt the pain, and there were reactions here, and there were issues that were developing in this country even before. There was a lot of hate in the newspapers back in 82, 83, before 1984. But in terms of the issue now, the fact is that there are generations that haven't been to India, some of them, but they still carry the hurt and the pain. I think that the distinguishing factor between what's happening on the ground in India and what's happening in places like Canada is that in India, despite the pain and despite the horrible suffering, there is room to heal, in the sense that you have communities living with each other. You don't compartmentalize. You just can't do that in a place like India. Whereas in Canada, you are an immigrant community, somewhat isolated from India, And therefore you live in your own heads sometimes, own head space, rather than living in a thriving larger Indian community. You become Sikhs and Hindus, Gujaratis and Punjabis rather than Indians. Whereas in India, I think there is still a lot of room just to be Indians, despite all the problems India has. So, and that is part of the reason why the issue isn't about justice for 1984 victims or for 1984 in Canada. The issue is more about a group of individuals who are sometimes second, third generation children. Some of them haven't even been to India, who are seeking justice through separation. For them, they want a separate state. They don't want to go live there, but they want a separate state for Sikhs in India. So it's a very different kind of, we've experienced things differently. We felt the pain, we felt the suffering, but it was somewhat long distance, and therefore it would remain in our heads for a long time because there's nothing to heal it. We don't live in India where there's a lot of battles taking place, a lot of healing at the same time taking place. Whereas 1984 wasn't an isolated incident, as you've all said. 2002. I mean, what happened recently in places like Delhi and JNU and other universities, and what's happening with the lynchings and all of that. So, in India, people recognize that this is a common struggle. Whereas here, for children, second, third generation children of the Sikhs, it remains a problem that they think it's only happened to them. And that creates a problem in terms of resolving the issues.
Right. Going back now and staying with this idea of how it was seen differently, perceived differently. You've written also about, in the book about the night when news came of Indira Gandhi's assassination and what the reactions were. But also when you're saying that, here in India, there is a sense of it being a common struggle. Brutality, violence, injustice affects different communities. And even within the majority community, there are sections who suffer. But you're saying those who have no connection with India now, the younger generation, but also at that time, there was a fair amount of bigotry and hatred within, there were certain elements in the Sikh community there. And there was this climate of hatred. And you've written about them, death threats against you. There were, this presenter there whom I had met, Sushma, and how there was, she was, there was death threats, but also they said that they would kidnap her 10-year-old boy. So there was this climate of hate. And how much of that has gone away? Has it gone away? Is it the same? And is there even an acknowledgement anywhere that ye nafrat ka jo web hai, which Sarabjit was also talking about, Sarabjot, sorry. It's a larger universe of violence जो आप भी perpetuate करते हैं. How is there going to be healing? How are you going to move ahead when you don't recognize that violence is violence, hate is hate?
I think in place like Canada, as I said, there are no active mechanisms for healing. I think that the anger has dissipated. Along with anger, I think has gone the hate as well. The hate actually pre-existed 1984 with newspapers like Indo-Canadian Times. I mean, they were like full of hatred, using language from the times of 1947, like, referring to Hindus as Mahashas and talking about them in a hateful fashion. But that hate has gone. And the community has kind of left that behind. You don't see the anger. Anger has dissipated as well. I think it is sort of the status quo is peace, but nobody talks about 1984 anymore. And the relationship, at least at the larger level, within the diaspora, amongst Hindus and Sikhs, is quite convivial, quite sort of normalized. With large sections of the population actually never hated each other to begin with. There was a certain core group of people who were very angry, and they lashed out. And I think some of them have kind of become more peaceful. With time, they understand that, you know, killing and hate isn't going to bring about any justice back in India or here. You know, but there are no active healing mechanisms that can take place in Canada because, you know, other than the threats, the violence that was done to individuals like Sushma and others, the Air India tragedy, other than those, you know, nothing really happened here. It all happened in India. Therefore, the healing of the diaspora will happen, I think, if Indians and the diaspora looks back to India and see what's happened in India. In fact, you know, a lot of the people who were activists in those days, I mean, look at what's happening in India today with the RSS and everything else, and realize that you know, yes, Sikhs were picked on in 1984, but so is everyone else being picked on at different points in history. Therefore, it is a common problem, and only a common struggle would deal with it in the end.
That is something that, you know, I think needs to be repeated, especially in these times, the worst of times, in some ways, I think, in India, is that it's a common struggle, and communities need to, you know, fight this struggle together for each other, not only for themselves. I just wanted to talk to you about your reactions, how you dealt with it. You wouldn't want me to call them, but I think your courage at that time, even before 84 happened, when you were being targeted because you know, because you were seen as I said, you were called Ujjal Gandhi and you and your cousin. How was it like? Because, you know, championing nonviolence and reason and good sense, or even just compassion at that time, or any time like that, which we're seeing in India now, how difficult is it?
You know, first of all, I mean, I grew up in India, grew up in a Sikh family. I kind of never looked at myself as a Sikh. I sort of always looked at myself as an Indian, and religion had really no place in my heart. But 1984 was the first time when I had to say to people publicly, you know, I come from a Sikh family. The reaction that was happening in British Columbia, in North America, Europe, within the diaspora wasn't something that was good for us in the diaspora at the end, because we have roots in Canada. We have struggled in Canada like we have in other places. We've had, you know, lack of franchise, lack of rights. Suddenly we were prospering as a community, and then 84 happened, and some of us became violent in North America and other places, which I was afraid that would actually set us back many decades. And that's why I spoke up. And of course, then I was a traitor to what I could never understand. But I think that phase has passed too. More and more people, you know, come up and say, you know, we were wrong, you were right. They come and talk to you privately. And we've grown up. I mean, we've become adults politically in that sense. And you know, from my perspective, I think that that I was worried that non-violence is being forgotten. That violence had become the creed amongst the activists. And you know, there is this within Sikhism. There is this Josh. And I heard a preacher in those days. He says, you know, we should have less Josh and more Hosh, and and so they were losing the Hosh, and I was worried that if no one spoke up, that we would forever lose Hosh for a long time in British Columbia and in Canada. So that's why I spoke up, because I saw myself as a Canadian citizen, Indian by heritage, Punjabi by mother tongue, and if it mattered to anybody, I was born and raised in a Sikh family. Those were my values, and I came at these issues with those values in my head.
Two questions I wanted to ask. One, of course, which you can take now or later, is I think it was interesting.
A little louder.
Sorry.
A little louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought, okay, now would you like to talk a little bit, because I think it has some relevance to your meetings with Indira Gandhi and the letter that she wrote to you, just to get a sense of, it was complicated. I mean, they got many things wrong, and it was brutal in many ways, but there was more to it. The failure.
I was, of course, I've been an activist, a lifelong activist on many issues, and the meeting came about because the Consul General in Vancouver found out that I was going to India, and they said, you should go meet Indira Gandhi. And I said, well, why would she meet me? He said, no, you should actually go tell her what's happening in North America. What was happening at that time, and I'm now talking about December of 1983 and January of 84. That's when I was in India. What was happening here for a couple of years before that was a lot of hate being spread by Punjabi newspapers, Punjabi radio stations, communal hate, trying to create tensions and hatred between Hindus and Sikhs in British Columbia, in Canada. And I was very worried. And I mean, so much so that I actually stopped subscribing to the newspapers that were doing that. I stopped listening to Punjabi radio because it was making me angry. And so I went and saw Mrs. Gandhi. In fact, I met Pindrawale as well, had a long debate with him. And after that, and Longowal, and then I went to see Mrs. Gandhi. And I basically told her that, this is an Indian issue. Obviously, I can't tell you what to do, but you should resolve it because it is impacting our lives in the diaspora in a negative way. And, she said to me, well, there has to be a sense of finality to an agreement. And whenever we talk to them, there's no sense of finality. If we make a deal with ABC, then XYZ come up and say, well, that's not an acceptable deal. Anyway, that's where we left it. And I wrote that letter to her afterwards because, I had penned a piece for one of the English papers here saying my Punjab is bleeding. Because, there were raw feelings at that time. And I wrote her a note saying, I had asked you to resolve this issue peacefully, but you haven't. And now this is going to cause perhaps lasting difficulties for Punjab and for India and for the diaspora.
This was after Operation Blue Star.
After Operation Blue Star. Yeah. And she actually wrote to me and she said, well, you don't really understand what's going on, but those are both in the, the letters are in the book.
Just one final question, about healing and justice and about, you're saying, people have moved on there, they're maturer. How much of that has to do with the kind of society, the kind of democracy that Canada is, the institutions that exist, how justice, is is fought for and how it is given, or how it is dispensed, for lack of a better word, and the failings, the the constant everyday failings of that kind of democracy in India, how democracy in India needs to mature. And it is a lack of that. Justice is not really going to happen in this case, many other cases, unless we become a truly progressive, enlightened democracy and our institutions work.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, what Mr. Modi has done to India, I mean, Congress was equally at fault, perhaps less so, but in terms of communalism, in terms of not remaining on guard for secularism. And here in this country, the system isn't necessarily the best in the world. I mean, but you do have some responsiveness in the sense that even though Air India tragedy, it took a long time to come to terms with it. There was an inquiry, there was a trial, although it wasn't successful. But those are the kinds of things that actually heal people. It gives people an opportunity to talk about those issues, and people see that something is being done, perhaps not the best that could have been done, but at least an effort was being made to do it, to redress the issues in Canada. I think the same kind of thing has to happen in India. I mean, you have had many committees and many commissions, but 84 isn't the only thing. I mean, 2002 and what's been happening recently, you could have commissions coming out of your ears in India on issues. Therefore, I think India has a larger problem of ethics in politics, honesty in government, honesty in public life. And what I believe, when we say it's the Nizam, it's the system, I rarely say that. I say it's the people. And, like in places like India, I have not heard, after perhaps Shastri and after Nehru and Gandhi, I've not heard political leaders talk about ethics, public values, and how we must conduct ourselves. Because if they did that, they would stand convicted in public opinion for what they are doing. And I think that that's the larger issue for India. And intellectuals and others do it, but political leadership, I haven't heard a political leader of any substance in India for the last many decades stand up and talk about what kind of country we should be building, what kind of values we should be bringing into public life. And I think that that's a much larger issue. Unless that is resolved, India will not make progress. In Canada, there are shared values, and you come into public life, and if you behave unethically, people will punish you. And in India, in fact, that's not the case.
Yeah, so that really, I wanted to make that the last question, because I wanted you to speak about this. It is a climate and the character, climate in a democracy, the character of a democracy, and that's where we need to work. And in addition to what you said about communities working together for everybody's security and rights. And as for whether we'll reach there, well, I don't know. I think political leaders lack ethics because, we let them get away with, I don't think we demand ethics from political leaders, which is why we are where we are. But I think there are a lot of people fighting for a more compassionate and just society. I think compassion is great, but even if there isn't compassion, at least let it be just.
Those of you that are in India, I salute you, because I think the struggle in India is much more difficult, much harder. It's easy for me to sit here thousands of miles away in the safety and security of Vancouver, British Columbia, in my own home, and talk about these issues. But it takes much more courage to do what you and others are doing in India, and I salute you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that we'll have a longer session with you at Majha sometime again soon. Ishmeet.
Of course.
I think
Great seeing you all.
It would be wonderful, actually, Ravi, because this has really set us thinking on a different path altogether, where we need to discuss things like where are we headed, even in terms of nation building and democracy, with the kind of not only the kind of leadership, but what we demand of our leaders either. I mean, there's obviously, we set the bar really low. So that's another discussion. Thank you very much for bringing up all these points. Ishmeet, I'm going to let you do the same.
I think it has been extremely meaningful for all of us to be here, and particularly, we began with talking about 84, commemorating, and we ended on a very successful note